Welcome to the seminars. It's been 30 years, would you believe? And it started in 1994. We were doing them live. And it's now 2024, and we're now doing them virtual. Now, when they started, I had this idea because there was beginning to be a spark of accordion interest. And I figured it would be a great idea to build an accordion community. And not just to feature last year's world competition winner. It doesn't necessarily have to be Dazzle. What I was looking for were so many different artistic dimensions to approach the accordion. And so every year I devised a theme, and every player did something with that particular theme, and they did their own thing with that theme. And this went on for quite some time. And the results were kind of amazing. And the truth of the matter is, even though the results were always amazing at various levels, some of them were incredibly successful, and some of them were in process or in progress, and some of them just didn't work. But the great thing about it, it was a wonderful laboratory to, in a safe environment, to try out and work on ideas. And we never really put down a single idea. We listened to everything that anyone would come up with. And some of the ideas were really, I would say, conservative. And some of the ideas were less conservative. And some of the ideas were quite far out, and some of them even a little whacked out. But nonetheless, we tried to deal with it all. And as I said, we're now 30 years into it, and we're still doing it. Now, we're doing it in different ways now, because now, not only are we getting wonderful performances, we're also getting a new breed and a new sense of video art. Not just video performances, although we have that too, but video art. And also, in the past, we've had also people who've played for criticism. We still have that. And we've always made it a point that when we criticized, that the criticisms would be absolutely constructive, and that we listened, as I said before, to every single idea that went down. And we never put anything down. And sure enough, some of the people who played for criticism ended up becoming later on participants. And so those who showed up in the audience eventually, they grew from watching us and attending all the seminars, and eventually they joined us. And we kind of love that. We have sort of a policy, a loose policy, that if you want to be a participant, we suggest that you attend at least one of our seminars to see what it is that we actually do. And so what we start with is a kind of a master class, and where we have talks and presentations, and then we take a break, and then we have performances. Now, over the years, due to people's schedules, it spills over a little bit. So some of the master classes have performances, and some of the performances, sometimes people will talk a little bit. So we're excited for our 30th year with the wonderful 3-day presentations of master classes and concerts. I'm Dr. William Schimmel. Performance, what does it entail? So let's start with step 1, technique. What is it? What is technique? Well, initially, many years ago, when someone went for accordion lessons, or maybe any lessons, it was, how to get those fingers moving fast. And now, especially for accordionists, the more you dazzled, the more technique you had. And truth of the matter is, that has little to do with actual technique. Technique is the ability to do what you need to do when you need to do it. And for an actor, it might be a particular kind of technique, and for a painter, it might be another kind. Now, where I'm going with this is that I've seen many of artists who come to me for lessons. I've had painters, and they wanted to learn the accordion. And I found out what worked very well is that they were able to bring their painting dimension to the accordion and develop a whole new technique with that. Of course, I added all the necessary theory that went along with it, but they had a whole new dimension of dealing with the instrument. For instance, people who go to design colleges, many of them end up forming rock bands. And sure enough, they bring that design issue into their rock bands. The famous artist Larry Rivers was a great tenor sax player. And frankly, I can hear the tenor sax in his paintings. So technique can cross over into other disciplines. Now, one of the problems people will have in going to a teacher sometimes is that the teacher will say to the student, do what I tell you and do that other stuff on your own time. Here we do it right. And sure enough, it creates a rub. And a more enlightened teacher today, and there are more enlightened teachers today, will actually try and find out what the student's really interested in. And if they're interested in Radiohead, they might ask the student, well, to bring a Radiohead record in or play something Radiohead and help them learn how to play it. And that might be a more enlightening approach to approach accordion playing or any particular kind of playing today. I've had adults who've come to me armed with these method books that they've had because they took lessons when they were kids. And they would come to me and say, I want to learn to do it right. And I would tell them, you know something, there is no perfect way to do this. And I would be more interested in finding out what they, why they want to come back to the accordion to begin with. Is it for playing in church? If that's the case, I would teach them a couple hymns, even if I started out by rote. Or if they wanted to form a rock band, perhaps the blues. Those 3 chords can go a long way. You can build upon that. So technique can be approached in so many different dimensions in so many different ways. And so I find, well, I'll go back to myself, is that I come from a family of accordionists. And I got my accordion because I threatened my parents if they didn't buy me one by age 10, I would do something drastic. So they bought me an accordion, and I heard all my uncles play, and they were better than average. They had their own wedding bands and things of that nature. And I started imitating them by ear and by rote and so forth. And then eventually they sent me to a great teacher. But nonetheless, what I started learning by ear really influenced when I finally went to this teacher who understood exactly where I was coming from. And so that's my first lesson on technique today. There's a lot of talk today about community involvement, audience participation, and it should. The concert hall should be more open, and people should participate in various ways. Now, for the accordion, a natural way of communication is to create the sing-along. And now, when you ask people to sing along, it can be threatening. Because if they don't feel like singing, they're not going to sing. On the other hand, you can be a catalyst for people wanting to join in. And it can be kind of wonderful. And I don't mean just producing abstract sounds. I think that's been done. But as the accordion is this natural storyteller, perhaps the audience can be part of that particular story. Way back in the old days, back in the 70s, I was commissioned to write a work for accordion, string trio, and 2 actors. I played one of the actors. And I wrote a work that was about a young lad who leaves home. His name is Himboro Him. And he gets in trouble, and he ends up getting the electric chair. And that's all I'll tell you. I don't want to give it entirely away. And then at the end, the audience joins in singing a hymn, Himboro Him, Himboro Him, Himber, 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 him, himber, 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 oh him, himber, oh him, himber, oh himber, himber, him. And when you play the chords on the accordion and everybody's playing, well, some people will sing along and some people won't. But nonetheless, the invitation to sing along is there. And it created a kind of a wonderful participation. And over the years, I've done various versions. I converted it into a musical. I converted it into an opera. But it still always worked as a rather intimate storytelling little piece. And this is a pared down version I've done where I do all the parts. And I'm now going to perform it for you. And when I reach that ballad of Himboro Him at the end, I invite you all to join in. Now, I can't see you, but I know that some of you will join in and some of you won't. But that's okay. It still is audience participation, which you will hear. And I think you'll get a kick out of the story. The first movement, leaving home. The second movement, the wayward vagabond. The third movement, the ballad of Himboro Him. One morning, young Himboro Him decided to leave home, to have, to hold, and to run his father. I think he's a bum. his mother. You never really did try to understand him. Son, it's good to see you. We missed you. I hope you find what you're looking for. Hey, buddy, can you spare a dime? Fresh-baked apple pie. I didn't mean to do it. It's time now, I'm sorry to say. Any last words? Son, it's good to see you. We missed you. Many are wrong. Many are wrong, did young Himby lay bare. But did he deserve the electric chair? A bum? Not my son. Himbro him, a hero at last. Won't you join us for the final blast, everyone? Now, with a name like Himbro Him, he definitely was going to get the electric chair. So don't name your kids anything that sounds like Himbro Him. That kid will be doomed forever. This is sort of an American Brecht, or a Flannery O'Connor meets Bertolt Brecht. It's the kind of work that I feel requires audience participation. And I think all of you out there watching can, in a sense, if you're a composer, think about working audience participation into your compositions. And it could be something like this, or any kind of storytelling device. Now, one of the things I ask you not to do, never to do, is never ask your audience to clap along. In other words, don't say, okay, everyone, now before I play, I now want you to clap along, use your hands. That means you're bombing or you're going to bomb. Now, if they naturally clap their hands after you start, that's a whole different story. But do not ask them to clap their hands before you start playing. And you just experienced the Wayward Vagabond. Hi, I'm Dr. William Schimmel, and welcome to my Eastside studio. This is Dr. Denise Konchelik, and today we're talking about practicing in real time. You can woodshed something into the ground, and eventually you might get what you're woodshedding, but it may not fit the entire context. So there is another process. Why not practice your piece in real time, keep on going, and leave out the notes that you don't get, of course. And then go back and fill in the blanks. And you'll get the concept as soon as you start playing. So Denise is going to play through a piece of music by Ralph Vaughan Williams, and she is not going to stop until she gets to the end of the section. And then we're going to take a look of what we have to fill in or what else we have to do. Okay, Denise? Oh, not bad for a trial run, really. Now, I'm going to give you one device, and I'm going to ask you just to take your finger and run it over each line. Okay, that's the first line, second line, third line. Don't worry about how much you're retaining or not. Okay, now take a mental photograph. Step back and take a mental photograph when I snap my fingers. And now play it. Almost perfect. Try this on for size. Yes, do try this at home, and you'll find that the results will be really, really staggering. Thank you very much. Welcome to the 5-minute ear training course. Segment 1. Make yourself a mental staff in your mind. And if it starts to move around, try as much as you can to straighten it. Then take a C scale and just put that on your mental staff. And then write down your favorite melodies as best you can. And then play them or sing them and correct them. If they're your favorite melodies, you'll be able to know how to correct them. And that's step 1, melody. Rhythm, put down 50 subdivisions of a quarter note. And you can start with 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can go up the ladder. You can mix it up. And then when you get to harmony, learn a blues or listen to a blues. It's the 1, 4, 5 progression or other variations of it, 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. And you'll learn the basic structure that you'll even find in all classical music. And then, as far as the history aspect of it, learn what Renaissance music is, learn what Baroque music is, learn what classical is, romantic and contemporary, and get that in your mind, perhaps, of course, by listening, and then start to mix them up in your mind to get, genre busting. And then the final aspect, put all the elements together, and the rest is in your hands. And this is making ear training your entire musical self. And you can use it out on the job, and you can use it as a format for training your ears for the rest of your musical life. Thank you. Dr. Robert Young McMahon has been with us for 30 years, giving us very insightful information on new works. He's now going to talk about Danza Ritual by Jose Cerebrier, which is one of the AAA commissioned works. And without further ado, this is Dr. Robert Young McMahon.
Hello everybody. Today I'm going to discuss Danza Ritual, a short but rather difficult piece by Jose Cerebrier. It's the fifth work that Elsie Bennett commissioned with the intermediate student in mind. I hope you enjoy it. 8 years after she commissioned the first composer under the auspices of the AAA Composers Commissioning Committee, Paul Creston, to write serious contemporary music for or including the accordion, and next assigned 24 more commissions to 18 other similarly renowned composers afterwards, Elsie Bennett, founding chair of the committee, set upon a new project best described in her own words in a letter dated November 10, 1965, to the already twice commissioned American master David Diamond, to quote, "The newest project I am working on is to commission some easier teaching pieces. The reason I thought of this idea is related to my own teaching experiences and my experiences as judge in many accordion contests. You see, the pieces we have commissioned thus far are really only for a virtuoso, or an outstanding student who probably studied for 6 or more years. We don't have the opportunity to use the pieces too often. Also, our young students are brought up on complete tonality and no dissonance whatsoever." End of quote. Not only did Diamond agree to write a piece at the intermediate level, but also 2 other past AAA commissionees, Carlos Suarnac and William Grant Still, accepted such commissions. A 4th person who joined in this project, though having not composed for the accordion before, was the noted South American conductor and composer Jose Cerebrier, who actually volunteered to write for the AAA. We will now concentrate on the history and analysis of that 3rd intermediate level solo commissioned by Elsie Bennett, namely Cerebrier's Danza Ritual, subtitled Toccata. Early in 1966, Elsie Bennett received a curious letter in the mail dated January 3rd from Jose Cerebrier, serving at the time as the associate conductor to Leopold Stokowski, famed director of the American Symphony Orchestra, stating that he had been interested for some time in obtaining a commission from your, Bennett's, association to write a short concerto for accordion and orchestra, or perhaps a solo work. End quote. Born in Montevideo, Uruguay, to Jewish, Russian, and Polish parents, young Jose showed great promise as a pianist, and eventually conductor, and ultimately came to New York to further his career. This led to his conducting debut with the American Symphony Orchestra, led by Stokowski, at Carnegie Hall in 1965. At the time, the eccentric American composer Charles Ives' Fourth Symphony had been considered so difficult that it was performed using 3 conductors at its premiere in 1965, almost 50 years after its composition. Stokowski, Cerebriere, and a 3rd conductor performed it this way. A few years later, though, Cerebriere conducted it alone and made his recording debut with the work, much to high critical acclaim. This is the point in his already illustrious career he had reached at the age of 28 when he sought an accordion commission from the AAA. Now in his mid-80s, he continues to be an internationally acclaimed and active conductor and composer, with numerous highly acclaimed recordings, including his second AAA commission for accordion and orchestra, Passacaglia and Perpetuum Mobile, a highly popular work which you can hear in the vast Naxos music library. Bennett and Cerebriere met on March 9th, 2 months after she had received his first letter, and discussed ideas for his composing a concerto. Regarding the commission, Cerebriere bargained with Elsie as follows, quote, "I was also thinking that you might want to commission me at the same time for a small work of intermediate difficulty, like the one Surinach did for you," Surinach being the first one to do an intermediate work for Elsie. "This way, with added income, I would be able to devote more time to the entire project," the composer continued. Well, Elsie agreed, and the AAA board, amazingly, approved the proposal at their next meeting on March 15th. The overall form of the composition is tripartite, with a lengthy A section, measures 1 through 41, a B section, divided into 2 repeating sections of near equal length, measures 43 to 50 and 51 to 58, respectively, and truncated return of the A section, thus labeled A prime, measures 59 to 86, the last 7 of which contain a brief rising and trilling chromatic scale-dominated codetta of sorts. This format is somewhat reminiscent of the so-called minuet in trio, or scherzo in trio forms often employed in 2nd or 3rd movements of instrumental works during the classical period, and that music scholars often label as compound ternary form. We will now do an overview of the entire score, which is only 4 pages, so we'll look at 2 at a time. The first 2 pages constitute the A section, which does not repeat. It is dominated by a 5-note whole tone, what we call pentachord, which you see bracketed in red where it occurs throughout. Most of the time it begins on D flat and goes through the whole tones of D flat, E flat, F, G, and A. And if you take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of those, you will get an augmented triad as well. Both the whole tone scale or pentachord and the augmented triad are unstable harmonies. This will give the piece a kind of rustic quality, a folk-like quality, and maybe a kind of aura of mystery. And you'll hear it happening over and over again, largely starting on D flat and then transposed a half step up, as you see in the 2nd bracket of the 1st system, to D. And this is a prominent feature of this whole A section. And you will look now on the second page and see that there are pedal tones in the upper notes, where you see the brackets near the bottom of the page, the last three systems. But in the lower notes, if you look at them linearly, they too are forming various transpositions of the pentachord, the whole tone pentachord. This eventually stops, as you see at the bottom of the page, where you see the blue ink there, which is a linking and rising chromatic scale. The final note, really, of the A section ended on the downbeat of that second measure of the last system. And after that, a long rising chromatic scale follows. We now go to the last two pages, constituting first the B section that you see on the top of the first page there, and then leading back at the bottom of the page to a partial return of the A section, greatly shortened and varied, which leads, as you see on the next page, ultimately to a very dramatic coda. So, beginning with the B section, it's approached by the top of that chromatic scale that began at the end of the second page of the previous showing, and a dramatic barreling glissando down to the first note of the B section. The B section, as you can see as an overview, consists of two repeating sections and is an escape to some degree from the A section, though still with the hard-pushing 16th notes. All of the areas marked in green indicate or label for us augmented triads, literally spelled here as an inverted E-flat augmented triad, E-flat, G, B natural. But with augmented triads, you can invert them any way you want. They all sound the same as a result of the augmented fifth and the two major thirds that create such an augmented triad. So view it as any of those as the root. We'll just call it an augmented triad. And it occurs repetitively a number of times, as you can see in the opening section of the B. And then in the second section, there's a whole extended part of it that goes for almost 3 measures at the end of the B section on the fourth system down on the left page. So this reflects, of course, the augmented qualities of the original motif of the 5-note augmented pentachord that is prominently used in the A section and in the returning A section, and to a lesser degree the coda. So this carries on and brings with it some nearly impossible to play widely spaced arpeggios, which we'll talk about later in the piece, but which pretty much alone destroys the notion that this could be played easily by an intermediate level student up to speed. And the speed is asked for is pretty great. Anyway, dramatic sweeping passages, wide open and very wide arpeggios, particularly beginning in the second section, or let me take that back, the second line of the first page that you're looking at here, with the G, F sharp, E flat in the first measure, second system, and next measure too. Very hard to play on the piano accordion. Much easier, I'm certain, on the chromatic button accordion, where distances between octaves are not so great. Anyway, we return after this dramatic digression from the A section to the familiar pentachord, whole tone pentachord, right where you see A1 indicated on the left-hand page at the bottom. Again, a very short return of A that goes on to the fourth page, ultimately leading to yet another plunging glissando, announcing in a way that we're now entering the climactic coda. Interestingly, the coda begins with a 5-note figure, and it is a pentachord, but they are now shrinking the whole steps to half and whole steps, and this creates an outer interval not of an augmented fifth, but a diminished fifth. About more when we look in some more detail in sections of this piece on later slides. But to make a long story short, we soon find ourselves going up very high on the keyboard with successive chromatic scale occurrences of trills, mostly in half steps, that lead up to one final trill that you see on the very last system of the last page, and one final glissando down to a dissonant slap of the wrist on the keys at the bottom of the right-hand keyboard, a tone cluster, against this ongoing ostinato bass accompaniment in quarters, in quarterly harmony, the EAD, again quartal harmony, that repeats itself in 4-note 16th groups incessantly for the last 3 lines. They sound altogether as a simultaneity against the slapped final cadential tone cluster in the right hand. So a very dramatic and almost, you might say, deafening end to this piece. A piece that is, again, folksy and very, very interesting. I do recommend it to those at a professional level or highly advanced level to play. Not quite, though, I would say, appropriate for the intermediate student.
When I was a Juilliard student, the Juilliard Orchestra was doing a work by B.A. Zimmerman, his last work, and it was to be conducted by Jose Cerebrier. And there was an accordion part in it. And so I go into the first rehearsal, and I look at my part, and my part is the note D. And that was it. So I had an attitude about it. I really did. And the featured guest on the program was this violinist doing the Saint-Saëns violin concerto. And I happened to know that piece because I've played it in contests. So I started playing it as he was warming up. And all the students in the orchestra started shuffling their feet and so forth. And Jose Cerebrier gave me a good scolding in front of the orchestra. And he was right. And so I had to stand up. I apologized to the violinist. I apologized to the orchestra. And we started the rehearsal, and I realized that that note D was important. That without the note D, you would really miss what was going on. As a matter of fact, that accordion note D was passing the D around to the orchestra. And it was one of the best lessons I ever had in protocol also. And so I left the rehearsal feeling very humble. And I knew he was right. So the next day, when I showed up for rehearsal, he hands me a copy of Danza Ritual. and I never learned it. But Bob McMahon did. A number of years ago, when I did my tango recordings, since he's from Argentina, I sent him a copy of my first tango recording, the Tango Project. And I wrote him a note saying, "Dear Jose, I hope you enjoy this record." And I get a letter back from his wife saying, "Mr. Cerebrier just loves your record." And I realized, again, I overstepped. I should have called him Maestro Cerebrier or Mr. Cerebrier. I called him Jose. So learn protocol. I'm saying this to all musicians. I'm saying this to all accordionists. Find out what the proper protocol is, and you will be better in the business. What you just heard was what I call a slam medley, or a car crash, and it ironically is two pieces by this group called The Cars, Boston-based. And it was from an album called Candio. And the pieces were The Dangerous Type and All I Can Do. And the trick there was to find this interesting place where you can go from one thing to the other without making it sound too natural, and which creates a bit of a clash, a bit of a crash, which adds a dimension to it that may interest you when you are playing a gig and you have to play a series of pieces. Last year, what we did was I showed you how to connect pieces by a common tone. And this particular slam medley actually finds interesting places to go from one thing to the other, almost in a clashing sort of way. So that's the slam medley. I now would like to introduce Will Holzhauser, also a veteran to the seminars. I think he's been with us 29 years, and he needs no introduction. He's big on the klezmer scene, and I asked him if he would talk on klezmer from the point of view of a non-Jewish musician. So, ladies and gentlemen, Will Holzhauser.
Hi, I'm Will Holzhauser, and Bill suggested a very interesting topic for me, which is being a non-Jewish klezmer musician. An important part of my journey as an accordionist over the last 30 years has been my involvement with klezmer music, the traditional Jewish music that originated in Eastern Europe. It's been an honor, a pleasure, and an education to be welcomed into this incredible musical community. At every step of the way, the musicians of the New York klezmer scene have been generous with their knowledge and happy to include me and many other non-Jewish musicians in their world. Of course, the music is beautiful, joyous, and expressive. As someone who didn't grow up inside Jewish culture, I've always tried to approach the music with an attitude of respect, doing my best to listen and learn as much as I can. I still wouldn't present myself as an expert on klezmer music. Klezmer is only one of many kinds of music that I'm involved with, but it's added a great deal to my understanding of music, of the accordion, and of cultural exchange in general. I was introduced to klezmer music when I was in college in the late 1980s and early 1990s, around the same time that I discovered my first accordion. I had an eclectic rock band with some friends, many of whom happened to be Jewish. We played country music, Cajun and Zydeco, rock music, Balkan music, and a little bit of klezmer. We were exploring many different sounds that we loved and found interesting. Meanwhile, we were taking academic classes from Mark Slovin, one of the world's leading ethnomusicologists and a true expert on klezmer music. The 1990s were an era of eclecticism and experimentation. So the idea behind our embrace of many genres was that your musical style doesn't necessarily have to be tied to your ethnicity. We just wanted to explore and have fun. Also during college, I encountered the accordion for the first time. I'd been playing jazz piano. A friend gave me an old accordion and it changed my life, opening doors to many kinds of music, including klezmer. For me, this has been part of my journey with the accordion. It introduces me to all these great kinds of music, and then I learn from those, and that influences the music that I write. For those of you who may not be familiar with klezmer, as I said before, it's Eastern European Jewish music, usually instrumental music. Draws on cantorial music, Hasidic chants, a lot of different kinds of Eastern European music, and has long been played at celebrations such as weddings, bar and bat mitzvahs. It's not considered to be a liturgical form of music. It came to the US in the late 19th and early 20th century with Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. And then it took on some American influences. For example, the drum kit, which is, of course, an African-American invention, became part of the standard klezmer band, or of many klezmer bands. Then with the devastation of European Jewish culture during World War II, the US became the principal locus of klezmer music. It experienced a decline in the mid-20th century as many Jewish Americans began to assimilate into mainstream American culture, and then experienced a revival beginning in the 1970s as younger musicians became interested in the music of their forebears, discovering old records of Jewish music from the early 20th century. So when I moved to New York in the 1990s, this revival movement had been underway for about 20 years. I started getting calls to fill in with klezmer bands, many of which had accordionists. Ismail Butera showed me more of the basics of the style than I knew. My knowledge was pretty minimal, and I began subbing with Yves Sikular's Metropolitan Klezmer Band. Later, I played for many years in David Krakauer's Klezmer Madness band. That was a major learning experience for me. David's music pushed the envelope of the tradition, and he liked to hire improvisers who could help him with that project, with his explorations and his innovations, while showing us the ropes of the style. The other New York klezmer musicians I've played with each have their own very creative ways of experimenting with the genre. Andy Statman, Michael Winograd, the Klezmatics, Lisa Gutkin, Frank London, and many others. These are all incredible musicians and friends who I really admire, and it's been a real joy to play with them, and again to be welcomed into this musical world. In fact, one hallmark of these artists in particular, and the klezmer revival scene as a whole, is inclusivity. These musicians are interested in justice, humanity, and relating to other religious and ethnic groups. They come from a strong Jewish identity, but they have many ways of building bridges. And it's inspiring to see these friends express their cultural traditions in a way that builds connections rather than divisions. In this divisive time, with an authoritarian Christian nationalist movement threatening to take power here in the US, I think the klezmer musicians of New York are a great example for how the rest of us can make our own social groups, religious or otherwise, more inclusive and open. On the musical side, learning about this beautiful music, of course, has been enriching and has also taught me many interesting things about the accordion. One aspect of being an invited guest in this culture is that it's important to have a respectful attitude and really do a deep dive into the music. Again, though I'm no expert, I've done a lot of my own research through listening and transcribing. Klezmer is an oral tradition, and the melodies are supposed to be ornamented, brought to life, played a little differently every time around, with ornaments, variations. Reading notes off the page from a book doesn't get you the whole sonic picture. Often, the accordion's role in klezmer music is as a rhythm instrument. This is fun. Some jazz or rock musicians have a mistaken idea that klezmer rhythm is just an oompa or simple 2-beat rhythm, but there's far more depth to it than that. The klezmer drumming style is subtle and colorful and meshes in an interesting way with the accordion's rhythmic role. There are several different dance rhythms in klezmer music. I'll demonstrate one, which is a rhythm called a bulgar. On one of my first klezmer gigs, I was playing a party at Tavern on the Green with a band. The band was led by a trumpeter and a clarinetist. I was pretty green, and they were trying to explain klezmer rhythm to me. One said, "Just keep it simple, yumpa bumpa, The other one said, no, it's more like this. Bum, ba, bum, ba, 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 bum, ba, bum, ba, ba, ba. And the thing is, they were both right. Those layers are both in there and more. So the trick is to keep the different layers to the rhythm kind of percolating, bubbling, and changing over a solid pulse. So I'll demonstrate a little bit. So first, the left hand kind of does the simpler oompa part. And the right hand does that cross rhythm. It's also important not to play too fast. After all, it's dance music. And one of the fun parts about playing klezmer is getting to play at a lot of social events where they really need live musicians. As the role of live musicians seems to shrink throughout most of our society, klezmer musicians are still an essential part of the fabric at many of these Jewish social events. They play a special role in the ritual that's taking place, not liturgical, but certainly emotional and connected with history and cultural heritage. For example, seeing the bride and groom picked up in chairs and carried around by their loved ones as the band plays is always moving to me. Shortly after I got married, I was playing a klezmer gig at a club in New York, and at one point my friends picked me up in a chair and carried me around. It was very sweet, very nice. Learning about anyone's tradition other than your own is always enriching. It gives you another window into what it means to be human, another perspective, celebration, contemplation, humor, nostalgia, all of that stuff, the whole range of artistic expression from another point of view. Klezmer, of course, has its own particular story to tell, and it's been a real honor and a pleasure to be part of it.
That was Will Holzhauser, and we'll take a break and come back for the concert in 5 minutes. This is concert number 1. And we will begin with a piece called The Black Swan. It's a video and performance by my wife, Mickey Goodman, with music by myself, editing by Godfrey Nelson. The Black Swan is a symbol of transformation. And the Black Swan is a mythical and mysterious being. People will see a black swan. They do exist. But sometimes they'll look at a black swan with disbelief. Because, after all, aren't swans supposed to be white? And this particular piece is an electronic score with a sampled accordion, which you hear very, very, very much in the distance at the very beginning. And as the piece progresses, you hear the black swan move into the textures and flutter. So, ladies and gentlemen, to launch off our concert series, The Black Swan 30, written for the 30th anniversary of the seminars. Over the years, Dr. Robert Young McMahon has written a series of short pieces, compact music. Here is Tidbits 2, Introduction, Adagio, Chorale. The next piece by me, Burla La Realita, is a reality, and if you listen closely, you may hear perhaps some Roy Orbison, some Verdi, and some Irving Berlin, all in a burlesque manner. The next work is by Gene Pritzker, the head of Composers Concordance. And this work is entitled More Love is Better. Do it again.
Action.
In 1958, when I entered my first accordion contest, we were coming in from Philadelphia and we were to go through the Lincoln Tunnel. And it was a new tube. And so therefore, it was beautifully white with nice tubing for lights. And I felt like I was going into a new dimension. And when we came out of the tunnel, we didn't have to drive very far, but the building that the contest took place seemed to be a small building, and I heard dozens of accordions coming out of that window. It was an incredible sound. And over the years, I became fascinated with that sound, and I wanted to reproduce it. Now, this is 1958. I knew nothing of West Side Story at that particular time. But it did have a rhythm, and I could also feel the rhythm of New York. And so this is a piece called Lincoln Tunnel, 1958, New Tube, by me. the great jazz pianist William Carmichael joins me in a jazz improvisation where I play the melodica. And the melodica is a kind of like a keyboard harmonica. And what I love about the melodica when I play jazz is that I can channel Coltrane on a soprano sax. I can channel Albert Ayler. I can channel Ornette Coleman. I could channel Pharoah Sanders. And Bill Carmichael, with his jazz chops, can channel all the wonderful jazz players that he loves, from Ahmad Jamal to Bill Evans. So here's our first in a set of 4 improvisations that we'll be doing this weekend. Kornmo's piece, My Upper Lady, draws its inspiration from the music hall. And one of the things about the music hall is that in many cases, and it was humorous, that their second verse was the same as the first, and their third verse was the same as the second. And you hear it in some compositions from the old music hall, but you'll hear it in like pieces by Hermits, like I'm Henry VIII, second verse, same as the first. Or the great Beatles song, Your Mother Should Know, sing it again. And you'll find out that he's using that in this particular song to create another sense of more. And every chorus, even though it's the same, is more of the same. Kornmo.
Hi, I'm Kornmo. I was trying to think of a song that I have that fits the theme. More is better. So I have a song that's got 3 verses. The thing is, it's all the same verse, just sung 3 times. You sing it once, you sing it more, and then more. So yeah, I wrote a song with a verse, wanted more of the same. So it's 3 verses, same verse. First time is for me, second time is for you, third time is for you again if you didn't want to do it the second time with me. All right, here it goes. So that's the first verse. The second verse is very similar to the first verse in that it's the exact same verse. congratulating me on the song. I said, why don't you use it for one of your commercials? He said, I don't think that's a good idea. Here's the third time. It's the same as the first 2 times. I know this because I wanted more, and I added it. Hurts me when I say.
David Stoller is one of our veterans of the seminars. We've had an association for many, many years. And here is a new work of his, The Pillars of Creation.
The Pillars of Creation.
our Harvard man, Benjamin Ickes, combined Come On Eileen to Bohemian Rhapsody and created that mashup. And he calls it Come On Boheme. The next piece is by Dan Cooper for accordion and electronics. Dan Cooper is on the board of Composers Concordance. If you listen closely, you could hear the hip hop. Now, Dr. Denise Konchelik will join me in Hava Nagila and Orpheus, and Hava Nagila to Victims of Oppression, and Orpheus by Offenbach. And I think many of you will recognize the can-can. Will Holzhauser is a fan of Fellini. And as we know, Fellini just loved clowns. They were a symbol of man's humanity, man's imperfections. It inspired Will to write Letter from a Clown. Ladies and gentlemen, Will Holzhauser.
I recently read a book about the director Federico Fellini. It was a wonderful book, and among other things, it talked about his love for and admiration for clowns. I thought this was fascinating, so I decided to write a piece dedicated to Fellini called Letter from a Clown.
Thank you for joining us today. We will see you tomorrow for another exciting day at the seminars. This is Dr. William Schimmel.